It was a busy afternoon at Westwood Auto Mall, a high-end car dealership known for its luxury vehicles and strict customer service standards. The showroom gleamed under the bright lights, rows of polished sports cars and sleek sedans lined up like trophies. Sales representatives in sharp suits paced the floor, ready to close deals with eager customers. But none of them expected what was about to happen that day, an event that would shake up the dealership and expose a shocking truth about who really owned it. The glass doors slid open, and in walked a towering figure. He wore a casual hoodie, loose-fitting jeans, and a pair of sneakers that looked almost too big for the showroom floor. His presence alone was enough to turn heads, but most of the employees didn't recognize him at first. To them, he was just another walk-in customer, probably someone looking around with no real intention to buy. One of the junior salesmen, Eric, nudged his colleague and whispered, "Check out this guy. No way he's serious about buying a car." His friend chuckled. "Yeah, probably just here to take selfies with the fancy rides." As the man strolled deeper into the showroom, he ran his fingers along the hood of a bright red sports car, admiring the sleek design. But before he could take a closer look, a stern voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir." The voice belonged to Mitchell Carter, the dealership's manager. He was a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, a pressed suit, and an expression that rarely softened. He believed in running a tight ship, making sure only serious buyers were entertained. And to him, this guy didn't look the part. "Can I help you?" Mitchell asked, his tone more skeptical than welcoming. The man turned to face him, his deep-set eyes calm and observant. "Yeah, I was actually interested in checking out a few cars," he said, his voice deep and familiar. But Mitchell didn't make the connection. The manager's expression didn't change. He crossed his arms and glanced at the man's casual attire. "We don't allow loitering in the showroom," he stated bluntly. "If you're not here to buy, I'll have to ask you to leave." A quiet hush fell over the nearby employees, some of whom had started to recognize the man. A couple of them whispered among themselves, but Mitchell remained oblivious. The man smiled, unfazed. "I understand, but I am interested in buying," he said, glancing around. "Maybe something like this one." He pointed to a sleek black luxury car near the center of the showroom. Mitchell let out a small, dismissive chuckle. "Sir, with all due respect, that car is worth more than most people make in a year. We cater to a certain clientele here. If you're just here to browse, I can suggest another dealership that might be more suited for your needs." The tension in the air thickened. A few employees exchanged nervous glances, realizing that Mitchell was on the verge of making a huge mistake. One of them, a younger salesman named Jake, hesitated before stepping forward. "Mr. Carter," he began carefully, "I think you should." Mitchell cut him off with a raised hand. "Not now, Jake. I'm handling this." He turned back to the man in the hoodie. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, sir." For the first time, a flicker of amusement passed through the man's eyes. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight that made a few people hold their breath. Mitchell scoffed, stepping forward. "Yes. If you don't leave on your own, I'll have security escort you out." That was the final straw. The man sighed, shaking his head slightly, and reached into his pocket. The employees who recognized him watched in anticipation, knowing exactly what was about to happen. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times and then held it up. Call rang through the quiet showroom. Then a voice answered on speakerphone. "Hey boss. What's up?" The man kept his eyes locked on Mitchell. "Yeah, I'm at the dealership right now. Can you let them know who I am?" The voice on the other end hesitated for a second before responding, now sounding slightly amused. Sure. Put me on with whoever's in charge." Mitchell frowned, confused, but took the phone. "Who is this?" he asked sharply. "This is the regional director," the voice replied smoothly. "And I'm assuming you just made a huge mistake. Because the man standing in front of you, he owns the dealership." Mitchell's face went pale. A cold wave of realization hit him as he looked back at the man, who was now watching him with a raised eyebrow. Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball legend, the businessman, the actual owner of Westwood Auto Mall. Mitchell's mouth opened, but no words came out. The employees who had been holding their breath finally exhaled, some of them grinning at the sheer irony of the situation. Shaq crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly. "So, am I still being kicked out?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Mitchell swallowed hard. He had just tried to eject his own boss from the dealership. And now, everyone was waiting to see what Shaq would do next. Mitchell could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Just moments ago, he had confidently dismissed this man as just another customer who didn't belong in the dealership. Now, standing face to face with Shaquille O'Neal, the owner of the very business he managed, he realized how badly he had miscalculated. The employees around them stood frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Some looked at each other with wide eyes, others tried to stifle nervous smiles. A few had already guessed the outcome, but nobody dared to speak first. Mitchell cleared his throat, forcing an awkward laugh. "Mr. O'Neal, I didn't recognize you," he stammered. "I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding." He straightened his tie, as if that would somehow erase the last few minutes of his actions. Shaq didn't say anything at first. He simply studied Mitchell, his face unreadable. He had encountered situations like this before, times when people judged him by what he was wearing instead of who he was. It wasn't new, but that didn't mean it didn't matter. "Didn't recognize me?" Shaq finally said, his deep voice calm but firm. "That's interesting." He looked around the dealership. "So you decide who can and can't be here based on what they look like?" No, sir, not at all," Mitchell quickly replied. "It's just, we get a lot of people who come in to browse but aren't serious about buying." He forced another uneasy smile. "We try to focus on, real customers." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Real customers, huh?" He let the words hang in the air. Jake, the young salesman who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped forward again. He knew this was his chance to do the right thing. "Mr. O'Neal," he said carefully, "I tried to tell Mr. Carter who you were, but—" Mitchell shot him a sharp look. "Not now, Jake." Shaq turned his gaze to the young employee. "Nah, let him speak." Jake hesitated for a second but then continued, choosing his words carefully. "It's just that. I recognized you right away. A lot of us did. And I thought it was important to let Mr. Carter know before things got out of hand." He glanced at Mitchell briefly before looking back at Shaq. "I didn't think it was fair to judge someone based on what they're wearing." Shaq nodded slowly, appreciating the honesty. He then looked back at Mitchell. "Seems like your guy here had the right idea," he said. "But you didn't want to listen." Mitchell felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. His palms were sweating. He had built his career on running this dealership with discipline, making sure everything operated efficiently. But now, the very policies he had enforced so strictly were crumbling in front of him. Shaq took a step closer. He wasn't angry, but he wanted to make a point. "Let me ask you something," he said. "If I wasn't me, if I was just some regular guy off the street, would you have treated me the same way?" Mitchell hesitated. He knew what the right answer was, but he also knew the truth. And the truth was what had gotten him into this mess. I was just trying to protect the business," he said weakly. Shaq chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Protect the business." He gestured around. "I am the business." A nervous silence followed. Mitchell's confidence, which had seemed so solid just minutes ago, was slipping fast. Shaq let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "You know, I bought this dealership because I believe in giving people a chance. People who work hard, who respect customers, who treat everyone the same, no matter what they look like." His voice grew heavier. "But what I just saw, that's not how I do business." Mitchell swallowed hard. "Mr. O'Neal, please." Shaq held up a hand. "I'm not saying anything else right now," he interrupted. "Not yet." He turned to the employees, his gaze sweeping across the room. "But I will be having a conversation with all of you soon." The weight of his words settled over the showroom. Nobody dared to move. Then, just as casually as he had entered, Shaq turned and walked toward the exit. But before he stepped through the doors, he paused and looked back at Mitchell one last time. "I'll be in touch." And with that he was gone. The moment the doors shut behind him, the tension inside the dealership snapped like a rubber band. Employees exhaled. Some exchanged stunned glances. Others shook their heads, still processing what had just happened. Mitchell, meanwhile, stood frozen in place. His mind was a blur, his body stiff. He had spent years building his reputation, climbing the ranks to become the manager of one of the most successful dealerships in the region. And now, in a matter of minutes, he had put all of that at risk because he had misjudged someone. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Jake, still standing nearby, finally spoke. "So, what now?" Nobody had an answer. Mitchell's hands clenched at his sides. He had made a mistake. A massive one. But was there still a way to fix it? Or had he just destroyed everything he had worked for? Outside, Shaq walked toward his car, his expression thoughtful. He had dealt with situations like this before. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was because it had happened in a business he owned. Maybe it was because he had just seen firsthand what kind of culture was being created under his name. One thing was clear. He wasn't going to let it slide. As he got into his car and started the engine, he already knew what his next move would be. The dealership was about to learn exactly what kind of owner he really was. Mitchell sat in his office, staring blankly at his desk. The dealership felt different now. Quieter, heavier. Word had spread fast among the employees, and even though nobody spoke about it openly, the tension was impossible to ignore. Conversations were whispered, glances were exchanged, and every ringing phone seemed to carry bad news. Mitchell had spent years in the auto industry, but he had never felt this uncertain about his own future. The regional director had called twice already, but Mitchell hadn't answered. What could he even say? There was no excuse for what happened. No way to justify the way he had treated Shaquille O'Neal. It was more than just a misunderstanding. It was a mistake that had revealed something deeper about how he ran things. And now the consequences were coming. Out on the showroom floor, the sales team moved cautiously, unsure of how to carry on as normal. Customers still came in, but there was an uneasiness in the air. Even Jake, who usually had the most energy, kept his head down, replaying the moment in his mind. He had tried to stop Mitchell. He had wanted to speak up sooner. Would that have made a difference? Behind the glass doors of the finance office, Lisa, one of the senior staff members, leaned toward her coworker, David, and whispered, "Do you think he's getting fired?" David exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but if he does, I can't say I'd be surprised." Lisa nodded. "I mean, it's Shaq. How do you mess up that bad?" Just then, the front doors opened again. This time it wasn't Shaq. Instead, a man in a tailored gray suit stepped inside. His expression serious. He glanced around before heading straight for Mitchell's office. The employees exchanged looks. This was it. Mitchell looked up as the man entered. His stomach twisted when he recognized him. Ethan Parker, the regional director. A no-nonsense businessman, Ethan had overseen the dealership's operations for years. If he was here in person, things were about to get real. Ethan closed the door behind him and took a seat across from Mitchell. He didn't waste time. "I spoke to Shaq." Mitchell swallowed. "And?" Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. "And he's pissed. Rightfully so." He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Do you have any idea how bad this looks?" Mitchell let out a breath. "I do." Ethan studied him for a moment. "Then tell me, what the hell were you thinking?" Mitchell hesitated before answering. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he was just following the standards he had set for the dealership. But the truth was, none of that mattered. Not anymore. I made a judgment call, he admitted finally. A bad one. Ethan didn't argue. He already knew. This isn't just about one mistake, Mitchell. It's about culture. The way you run this place. The way you treat people. He shook his head. Shaq didn't just buy this dealership to make money. He bought it because he believes in something bigger. And right now, he's questioning if he put the right people in charge. The words stung, but Mitchell couldn't deny them. Ethan leaned back, studying him carefully. He hasn't made a final decision yet, he continued. But he's coming back. Soon. Mitchell sat up straighter. When? Ethan shrugged. Could be tomorrow. Could be next week. But when he does, he's going to want answers. And not just from you. Mitchell frowned. What do you mean? Ethan sighed. I mean, he's not just looking at you. He's looking at everyone. He wants to know what kind of place this is. How the employees feel. How customers are treated. He's digging deep. He let that sink in before adding. And if he doesn't like what he finds, he's not just replacing you. He's overhauling the whole damn dealership. Mitchell felt the weight of those words settle on him. This wasn't just about his job anymore. This was bigger. If Shaq decided the culture of the dealership was broken, he wouldn't just fire Mitchell. He'd clean house. Mitchell knew he had to act. After Ethan left, Mitchell sat in silence for a long time. Then slowly he got up and stepped out onto the showroom floor. The employees fell silent when they saw him, their expressions unreadable. He cleared his throat. Everyone, listen up. They gathered around, waiting. He wasn't sure exactly what to say, but he knew one thing. He couldn't ignore this. I know what happened earlier put this place in a bad light, he began. And that's on me. He glanced around, meeting the eyes of his employees. But it's not just about today. I need to know. How do you all really feel about how things are run here? A few people exchanged hesitant glances. Then, to Mitchell's surprise, Jake was the first to speak. Honestly, he asked. It's not great. Mitchell tensed but nodded. Go on. Jake took a breath. A lot of us feel like this place only really cares about numbers. Not people. Not the customers, not the employees. Just sales. He glanced around, as if checking if anyone else agreed. Several nodded. Lisa chimed in. We follow rules, yeah, but sometimes it feels like we're being trained to judge people instead of actually helping them. David added, like today. That wasn't a one-time thing. We've all seen it happen before. Maybe not with Shaq, but with regular customers. People who walk in and don't look like they can afford a car, so they get ignored or pushed away. Mitchell felt his throat tighten. He had spent so much time focusing on keeping the dealership running smoothly that he hadn't realized the culture he had created. It wasn't just about this one incident. It was about everything. He took a deep breath. I hear you, he said finally. And I know words aren't enough. But I want to fix this. Before Shaq comes back, before decisions get made. We need to be better. The employees watched him carefully. Some looked skeptical. Others seemed hopeful. Mitchell knew it wouldn't be easy. He didn't even know if it would be enough. But one thing was certain, Shaq would return. And when he did, he wouldn't just be looking for apologies. He'd be looking for real change. The next few days at the dealership felt like walking on thin ice. Everyone knew Shaq would be back soon, but nobody knew exactly when. Every time the front doors swung open, people tensed up, half expecting him to walk in. Conversations were quieter, glances more cautious. Mitchell could feel the weight of the unspoken fear in the air. No one knew how bad the fallout would be. Mitchell tried to stay focused. He called meetings, talked to employees one-on-one, and listened more than he had in years. He didn't just want to fix his mistake. He wanted to prove that things could change. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he had started too late. Jake, Lisa, and David had been the most vocal about the problems in the dealership, and now they were watching him closely. They weren't the only ones. Employees who had never spoken up before were now paying attention. Was Mitchell serious about change, or was this just a desperate attempt to save himself? One afternoon, as Mitchell was reviewing reports in his office, Jake knocked and stepped in. "Got a minute?" Mitchell nodded. "What's on your mind?" Jake hesitated for a second, then said, "Look, I see you're trying. But it's not just about what we think. It's about what he thinks." Mitchell knew exactly who Jake meant. "You think Shaq's already made up his mind?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. But if I were him, I'd be watching to see if this is real. Or if it's just panic." Mitchell sighed, leaning back in his chair. "And what do you think?" Jake studied him for a moment before answering. "I think people don't change overnight. But maybe they change when they have to." Mitchell didn't respond right away. He knew Jake was right. And he also knew that whatever happened next would determine everything. The next morning, just as the dealership was opening, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front. A few employees glanced outside, then quickly looked away. The air inside the showroom grew thick with tension. No one said a word, but they all knew. Shaq had arrived. The doors swung open and Shaq stepped inside, his presence filling the room. He didn't need to say anything. Everyone felt it. He took a slow look around, his gaze moving over the employees, the sales desks, the cars on display. He wasn't in a hurry. He was watching. Mitchell stepped forward, feeling the eyes of the entire dealership on him. His throat was dry, but he forced himself to speak. "Mr. O'Neal," he said, his voice steady. "Welcome back." Shaq's expression didn't change. He nodded but didn't say anything. Instead, he started walking. Employees stepped aside, watching as he moved through the dealership, stopping here and there, observing everything. Every so often, he would glance at an employee, exchange a nod, and keep walking. Then, to everyone's surprise, he walked over to Jake. "How's business?" Shaq asked, his deep voice calm but firm. Jake swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "We're working on it," he said honestly. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Working on it, huh?" Jake glanced at Mitchell before answering. "Yeah, we are." Shaq let the words sit in the air before turning his attention back to Mitchell. "Let's talk." Mitchell nodded, leading the way toward his office. But just before they reached the door, Shaq stopped and turned back to the employees. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "I want everyone to hear this." A ripple of surprise ran through the showroom. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Was this it? Was Shaq about to make a decision right here, in front of everyone? Mitchell's heart pounded. He had prepared himself for this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was ready. Shaq folded his arms and looked around the room. "I came here today to see something," he said. "To see if what happened last time was just one man's mistake, or if it was something bigger." His gaze moved over the employees. "And after talking to some of you, I got my answer." A heavy silence filled the air. No one dared to move. Shaq turned to Mitchell. "Tell me something," he said. "Do you think this place deserves another chance?" Mitchell met his eyes, knowing that this was the moment everything came down to. His career, the dealership, the employees, it all hung in the balance. And then, before he could answer, Shaq added, "Because I already know what I think." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Mitchell could feel every set of eyes on him. His next words could change everything. But before he could speak, Shaq took a step closer, his expression unreadable. And then, in the slowest, heaviest voice possible, he said, "Well." The suspense was unbearable. Mitchell felt a bead of sweat roll down his back. Every second of silence stretched impossibly long. He had rehearsed a dozen responses in his head, but now, standing under Shaq's unblinking gaze, none of them seemed good enough. His employees were watching, waiting to see if their manager, the man who had nearly cost them everything, could prove that he deserved to stay. Taking a slow breath, Mitchell met Shaq's eyes. "I think we do," he said finally. But I don't expect you to take my word for it. He turned slightly, looking at the employees around him. It's not just about me. It's about all of them. Shaq didn't say anything, just studied him with that same unreadable expression. Then, before Mitchell could add anything else, Shaq shifted his focus to Lisa. And what do you think? Lisa straightened. It was clear she hadn't expected to be put on the spot. She hesitated for a second, then said, I think we've needed change for a long time. And yeah, Mitchell's been trying. But I guess the real question is, are we fixing this because we want to? Or just because we're scared of losing our jobs? A murmur rippled through the room. She had said what a lot of them were thinking. Shaq let the words settle, then turned to Jake. What about you? Jake ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. I think people can change, he said carefully. But I also think people don't forget when they've been treated badly. Shaq nodded slowly, then looked at David, then at two more employees, asking each one what they thought. The answers varied. Some were hopeful, some were uncertain, but none were blind to the fact that things had been broken for a long time. Then, just as the tension in the room felt like it couldn't get any heavier, the doors to the dealership swung open again. Two men in suits walked in. They weren't customers. They weren't employees. And judging by the way Shaq's expression hardened, he knew exactly who they were. Mitchell's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The taller of the two men, a broad-shouldered guy in his late 40s, stepped forward. His sharp gaze moved over the showroom before settling on Shaq. Mr. O'Neal, he said in a clipped voice. We need to talk. Shaq's jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. I figured you'd show up sooner or later. Mitchell glanced between them, confusion growing. Who were these men? And why did it feel like whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with him, but everything to do with the dealership? Shaq folded his arms. Go ahead, he said. Say what you came here to say. The man adjusted his suit jacket. We represent the investors who have a stake in this dealership, he said, his tone cool. And we've been watching this situation unfold very carefully. Mitchell's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about Shaq being the owner. There were bigger players involved, ones Mitchell hadn't even known existed. The man continued. Some of us are concerned. The media attention, the controversy. It's bad for business. He paused. And some of us think it might be time to reconsider the ownership structure. A shocked silence filled the room. Mitchell's mind reeled. Were they saying what he thought they were saying? That Shaq, the man who had bought the dealership, the man Mitchell had humiliated, was now at risk of losing it. Shaq let out a dry chuckle. So that's how it is, he said, shaking his head. You wait until there's a problem, and now you want to question my ownership? The second man, a shorter, stockier guy with graying hair, stepped forward. You've got influence, Shaq. No one's denying that. But running a dealership isn't just about influence. It's about stability. And right now, there's a lot of uncertainty here. Mitchell's throat felt dry. This was bad. Really bad. Shaq's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. So let me guess. You want me to step back? Sell my stake? Let you bring in someone safe to run things? The taller man didn't confirm it outright, but his silence said everything. Mitchell felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. All this time he had been so focused on his job, his mistakes, his future at the dealership. He hadn't realized that the stakes were even bigger. This wasn't just about him anymore. If these men got their way, Shaq wouldn't be coming back to fix the dealership. He wouldn't be making changes. He'd be gone. The employees were frozen, eyes darting between Shaq and the two men. No one knew what to say. This wasn't just some corporate shakeup. It felt personal. Then, without warning, Shaq turned to Mitchell. You still think this place deserves another chance? He asked, his voice steady. Mitchell swallowed. He understood now. Shaq wasn't just asking about the dealership. He was asking if he had people who were willing to fight for it. Mitchell took a deep breath and did something he never thought he'd do. He stepped forward, standing next to Shaq, and turned to the two men. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice firm. The taller man raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Mitchell's heart pounded, but he didn't back down. "This dealership does have problems," he admitted. "But not because of Shaq. It's because people like me didn't see them sooner. It's because we forgot that a business isn't just about sales. It's about people." He looked at the employees, then back at Shaq. "He's the only one who actually tried to fix that." A few employees murmured in agreement. Then Jake stepped forward. "He's right," he said. "You want to talk about stability. You don't get that by kicking out the one person who actually cares about the culture here." Lisa nodded. "If Shaq goes, we all lose," David added. "And if you think people won't notice, you're wrong. Customers will see what's happening. Employees will see it. And if you really care about business, you should care about that." The two men exchanged glances. It was clear they hadn't expected this. Employees, regular employees, actually standing up for their boss. That wasn't how these things usually worked. Shaq watched it all unfold, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned back to the investors. "Looks like you've got your answer," he said simply. The room held its breath, waiting for their response. And just like that, the stakes had never been higher. The room was dead silent. Every eye was locked on the two investors, waiting to see what they would do next. They had come in expecting to make a decision without resistance, but now the employees, people they hadn't even considered important, had turned the moment upside down. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about loyalty. The taller man, clearly frustrated, adjusted his tie and exhaled through his nose. "Look, emotions are running high right now," he said, his voice measured. "But at the end of the day, this is about what's best for the company." Shaq tilted his head slightly. "You think getting rid of me is what's best?" The shorter investor finally spoke up. "No one's saying you have to leave completely," he said. "But a quieter role, something behind the scenes, maybe that's what's needed." Shaq let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "So, let me get this straight," he said. "I step back, let someone else run this place, and then what? You bring in another safe guy like Mitchell used to be. Someone who only cares about numbers and ignores the people working their tails off every day." Mitchell swallowed hard. That had been him not long ago. But now, standing here, he knew that version of himself couldn't run this dealership anymore. Not the way it needed to be run. The employees weren't silent anymore. A few were whispering among themselves, nodding. They had worked under Mitchell's old management style, and they knew exactly what Shaq was talking about. Jake stepped forward again. "If Shaq goes, we know what happens next," he said. "A new boss comes in, promises a fresh start, but things go back to the way they were. And in a year, we'll all be back to square one." Lisa crossed her arms. "If that's the plan, you might as well tell us now. Because I don't think a lot of us will stick around for it." The investors exchanged another glance. They hadn't expected this much pushback. Then, before they could respond, Shaq did something no one saw coming. He pulled out his phone. Without breaking eye contact with the investors, he dialed a number and put the call on speaker. "Hey, it's me," he said when the other line picked up. "I need you at the dealership. Now." There was a pause. Then a voice on the other end said, "On my way." Shaq ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. The investors looked at him, puzzled. "Who was that?" the taller one asked. Shaq smiled, but there was something knowing behind it. "You'll see." The air in the dealership buzzed with tension. Nobody knew what was about to happen, but one thing was clear. Shaq had just played a card they didn't see coming. 15 minutes later, the doors swung open again. A well-dressed woman in her late 40s walked in, moving with a kind of confidence that made everyone take notice. Mitchell frowned, trying to place her face. Then, as she got closer, he realized. He had seen her before. In business magazines. On financial news segments. She was one of Shaq's most trusted advisors. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, two more individuals entered, one a well-known attorney, the other a corporate strategist. The investors shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected this. The woman stopped beside Shaq, nodding to him before turning to the investors. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, "I believe you wanted to discuss ownership." The taller investor's jaw tightened. "This doesn't change the situation," he said. "We have concerns. And so does Shaquille," the woman cut in. "That's why we're here. To make things official." Mitchell's stomach twisted. Official? What did that mean? Shaq finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You're right about one thing," he said to the investors. "This dealership does need stability. And I'm making sure it gets it." He paused. "That's why I'm buying you out." The entire room froze. The investors' expressions flickered with shock, but Shaq didn't give them time to react. He nodded toward the woman beside him. "The paperwork's already in motion. You can either take the deal or we can make things a whole lot more complicated." Mitchell's breath caught. This wasn't just Shaq holding onto his stake. He was taking control. The taller investor clenched his jaw. "This isn't how we do things," he muttered. Shaq shrugged. "Then maybe it's time for a new way of doing things." Silence stretched. The investors looked at each other, realizing they had lost control of the situation. The shorter man exhaled through his nose. "We'll review the offer." Shaq gave them a knowing smile. "You do that." With no other choice, the two men turned and walked out, their stiff postures making it clear they weren't happy. As soon as the doors shut behind them, the room erupted. Employees exchanged stunned looks, whispering among themselves. Mitchell turned to Shaq, still trying to process what had just happened. "So, you just own the dealership now?" he asked. Shaq grinned. "Not yet. But soon." Mitchell let out a slow breath. Everything had changed in a matter of minutes. Shaq clapped his hands together, looking around at the employees. "All right," he said. "Now that the drama's over, let's get back to work." Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension. Employees started to relax, some even smiling. Then Shaq turned back to Mitchell, his expression serious. "But first," he said, "we gotta talk about your job." Mitchell's heart skipped. Was this it? Was he about to be fired after everything? But then Shaq surprised him again. "You wanted another chance," he said. "You got it. But this time you're not just running a dealership. You're helping me build one." Mitchell stared at him. "Wait, what do you mean?" Shaq crossed his arms. "I mean, I'm not just buying this place to keep things the same. We're making real changes. And if you're serious about fixing what's broken, you're gonna help me do it." Mitchell felt a lump in his throat. "Second chance. Real one." He straightened. "I won't let you down." Shaq grinned. "Good. Because if you do, I'll personally kick you out this time." The employees laughed. The tension was finally lifting, and for the first time in a long time, hope filled the dealership. Mitchell exhaled, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Excitement. This wasn't just about keeping his job. It was about building something better. The dealership had never felt so alive. The employees, who had spent years just clocking in and out, now moved with a renewed energy. There was a buzz in the air, an unspoken understanding that things were about to change, and for once, the change was for the better. Mitchell still couldn't quite believe it. A few hours ago, he had been on the verge of losing everything, but now he was being handed an opportunity he never imagined. He glanced at Shaq, who was casually leaning against the front desk, talking to a few employees like he had been there for years. It was strange. Mitchell had spent so long seeing Shaq as a distant figure, a name on paperwork, an owner who had nothing to do with the day-to-day operations. But now he was standing in the middle of it all, more involved than Mitchell had ever been. Lisa walked up beside Mitchell, nudging him slightly. "You realize this means you actually have to work now, right?" she teased. Mitchell let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, I figured that part out." Jake crossed his arms, grinning. And no more hiding in your office all day either. Mitchell sighed dramatically. Guess I'll have to get used to talking to people. Lisa smirked. You'll survive. As the employees started to filter back to their tasks, the dealership settled into a new rhythm, one that felt different, more open. Mitchell knew it wasn't going to be easy. There was still a lot of work to do, and he had a long way to go to prove himself to everyone. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something bigger than just making sales numbers. Shaq eventually made his way back over to Mitchell, folding his arms as he looked around. You know, he said, I wasn't planning on getting this involved. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. So why did you? Shaq shrugged. Because people like them. He nodded toward the employees. They're the ones who actually keep this place running. And I'm not about to let a few corporate suits decide their future. Mitchell nodded slowly. So what happens next? Shaq exhaled. Now we get to work. We rebuild. We fix what's broken. And we make this place something people are proud to be a part of. Mitchell felt the weight of that responsibility, but instead of fear, he felt determination. Then let's do it. Over the next few weeks, changes started happening. Small at first but noticeable. The employees had more of a say in how things were run. Policies that made life difficult for them were revised. Training was improved, customer service was prioritized. And most importantly, the toxic work culture that had been festering under Mitchell's old leadership was dismantled piece by piece. There were challenges, of course. Some employees struggled to adjust. A few resisted the changes, unable to shake the habits of the past. But gradually, the dealership started to feel like a place where people actually wanted to work. One afternoon, as Mitchell was reviewing paperwork in his office, though it felt different now, Shaq stepped inside, tossing a folder onto his desk. Mitchell glanced at it, confused. What's this? Shaq leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. A second location. Mitchell blinked. Wait, what? Shaq grinned. Told you we were gonna rebuild. And if we're doing this right, we're gonna need more than one place. Mitchell stared at the folder, his heart pounding. Expanding the dealership wasn't something he had even considered. He was still wrapping his head around fixing this one. But now, Shaq was talking about growing even bigger. You serious? Mitchell asked. Shaq smirked. What do you think? Mitchell opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. A new location, a chance to start fresh while keeping everything they had learned in mind. It was terrifying. It was huge. And yet, for the first time in his career, Mitchell didn't feel like he was in over his head. He looked up at Shaq, determination setting in. All right, he said. Let's build something great. Shaq nodded, satisfied. Now you're getting it. As Shaq left the office, Mitchell leaned back in his chair, exhaling. He had started this journey as a man clinging to his position, desperate to prove he belonged. But now he knew that leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about trust. It was about people. And for the first time, he wasn't just working for himself. He was working for something bigger. As the sun set outside, casting a golden glow over the dealership lot, Mitchell stood up, rolled his shoulders, and walked out to join his team. There was still a lot to do. But this time he wasn't doing it alone.